For a long time, I called myself a believer while living a life where God was fourth on the list. Not because I stopped believing, but because my career needed me right now. My family needed me right now. My finances needed me right now. God could wait until Sunday, and honestly, Sunday was sometimes the only hour in the week where I gave him any real attention at all. I had a full Christian life on the surface. The language, the attendance, the conversations. But underneath it all, I was running everything myself. God was invited to bless my plans. He was not being asked to author them. What I could not see then was that I had not actually placed God fourth. What I had done was build an entire life on a foundation that was not Him. And everything I built on that foundation needed me constantly holding it up. The moment I stepped back, things would start to lean. Not because I was doing it wrong, because the ground underneath was not designed to hold the weight I was placing on it. This video is not about carving out more time for God in your schedule. I tried that for years, and it changed very little. This is about what I actually watched shift, when God moved from a slot in my day to the foundation underneath every decision I made, every relationship I invested in, every moment I had to face something I could not control. What He showed me in that process was not what I expected, and I think it might be exactly what you need to hear. 1. When God comes first, your decisions stop being driven by fear. The first thing God showed me when He came first was something I did not expect to find in my decision-making. Most of the decisions we make are not actually driven by where we want to go. They are driven by what we are afraid of losing. The job decision made because you are terrified of financial insecurity. The relationship decision made because you are scared of being alone. The career move avoided because you are afraid of what people will think if it does not work out. Fear is a very convincing compass. It always has a strong opinion about which direction to go, but it never actually leads you forward. It just keeps you moving in circles around the thing you are most afraid of. In 1 Kings 3, God came to Solomon and asked him what he wanted. Solomon was standing at the beginning of a kingdom he was not sure he was ready to lead. He could have asked for anything, and what he asked for was the wisdom to serve the people in front of him well. Not security, not recognition, not a guarantee that things would go smoothly, just the ability to do what he had been placed there to do. What happened next was not a reward for asking cleverly. It was the natural result of what happens when God genuinely occupies the center. When He comes first, what you want begins to shift. And when what you want shifts, fear loses its grip on the steering wheel. I can look back at the worst decisions of my life and trace almost every one of them back to a moment when I was afraid of something. And the best ones almost always came from a place of unusual quiet. That quiet was never the result of having everything figured out. It was the result of God being in the right position. Before the next decision you need to make, ask yourself this honestly. Is this being driven by faith or by fear? You usually already know the answer. The harder question is whether you are willing to sit with it long enough to let it change what you do next. 2. When God comes first, what you call urgent begins to look different. The second thing God showed me was how distorted my sense of urgency had become without me realizing it. We live inside a culture that has made everything feel immediate. Every notification demands a response. Every opportunity feels like it will expire if you do not grab it in the next 5 minutes. Every conversation, every deadline, every demand on your attention arrives with the same unspoken message. This cannot wait. And in that environment, God ends up being the only thing that consistently gets told He can. I did this for years without calling it what it was. I was not choosing busyness over God. I genuinely believed everything on my list was necessary. The problem was that my list was being written by urgency rather than importance. And those two things feel identical when you are in the middle of them. Luke 10 gives us Martha, and I want to be careful here because Martha is easy to misread. She was not doing something wrong. The meal needed to be prepared. The guests needed to be received. What Jesus pointed out was not that her work was unnecessary. It was that she had allowed anxiety about many things to crowd out the one thing that could not be substituted. Mary had found it. Martha had not stopped moving long enough to notice it was available. I used to assume that people who put God first had simpler lives than mine, less pressure, fewer obligations, more margin. I was completely wrong about that. The people I have met who genuinely live with God first are often just as busy as anyone else. The difference is that their busyness does not get to decide what matters most. Something else does. Your to-do list will not get shorter when God comes first. But you will start seeing the difference between what is genuinely important and what is simply making noise. 3. When God comes first, the people he removes stop feeling like loss. The third thing God showed me was one of the most painful parts of the process. And I want to be honest about that before I say anything else. When God genuinely moves into first place in your life, things start shifting around that position. And some of those things are people. Relationships you have invested years into. Circles that gave you a sense of belonging. Friendships that felt like they would always be there. And when those connections begin to loosen or disappear, obedience starts to feel like it is costing you more than you agreed to pay. I do not want to minimize that. It is real and it hurts. Genesis 12 tells us that Abraham left his country, his people, and his father's household, not because those things were bad, not because the people were enemies. He left because the destination God was taking him toward could only be reached by releasing the starting point. The people he left behind were not obstacles. They simply did not belong in the next chapter of where God was leading him. I lost some relationships in the season. I started putting God first in a real way. Not dramatically. Some people just gradually moved at a distance. And I will be honest, in the moment, it felt like something was being taken from me. It took time before I could see what was actually happening. The people who stayed were the ones aligned with where God was taking me. The ones who left created the space that the next season required. If you are in a season where relationships are shifting as God moves into first place, resist the urge to immediately call it loss. Instead, ask a different question. What is this making room for that could not fit while that was still there? 4. When God comes first, provision arrives through paths you would never have chosen. The fourth thing God showed me disrupted something I did not even know I was doing. All of us have familiar channels we expect provision to come through. The job that produces the income. The connection that opens the door. The skill that creates the opportunity. We have a mental map of how things work, and we spend most of our energy maintaining access to those channels. There is nothing wrong with that, until it becomes the ceiling on what we allow God to do. When God genuinely comes first, He tends to send provision through routes that were never on your map, and that is precisely why He needs to be first. Because if He is not, you will dismiss what He is sending, because it does not look like what you were expecting. In 2 Kings 4, a widow came to Elisha with nothing but a small jar of oil and a debt that was about to cost her everything. Elisha did not give her a financial strategy. He gave her an instruction that made no obvious sense. Go and borrow as many empty containers as you can find from your neighbors. And the oil kept flowing until there were no containers left to fill. The provision was not limited by what she started with. It was limited by how many vessels she was willing to go and collect. I have had moments in my own life when resources arrived from directions I never would have thought to look. Not because I was passive or not working hard, but because I had positioned God ahead of my own plan for how things were supposed to happen, and He used pathways I could not have engineered on my own. Here is what I have come to understand about this. When your familiar channels become the only channels you are open to, you have quietly placed a ceiling on what God can bring into your life. Putting Him first means staying open to receiving from directions you did not plan for and would not have chosen yourself. 5. When God comes first, the hard seasons stop being just hard and start being purposeful. The fifth thing God showed me is the one that changed how I experience difficulty at the most fundamental level. When life gets hard and God is not in first place, hard seasons are just hard. There is no layer underneath the pain, no framework that gives the difficulty any meaning beyond the difficulty itself. Just exhaustion and the one question that plays on repeat: when does this end? And I have found that the absence of meaning is often what makes a hard season genuinely unbearable. Not the hardship itself, the emptiness underneath it. I have lived through difficult seasons with God in first place and without Him there. And I want to say clearly that the hard seasons did not become easier when He moved into first place. The circumstances were just as real. The pressure was just as heavy. But something was fundamentally different about how I was able to carry it. James 1:2-4 does not promise that things will work out the way you hoped. What it says is that the testing of your faith produces something: perseverance. And perseverance, when it is allowed to finish its work, produces a completeness in you that nothing else in your life can manufacture. The storm is not incidental to your story. It is doing something inside you that good weather is structurally incapable of doing. I have come to believe that meaning does not remove pain, but it changes your entire relationship with how you carry it. When you can see that something is being built inside a hard season, you stop spending all your energy trying to escape it and start being present, enough inside it to receive what it is producing. When God comes first and a hard season arrives, try shifting the question. Not when does this end, but what is being built in me right now that could only come from a season exactly like this one. Let me bring you back to where this started. A person who called himself a believer while God was fourth on the list, and everything built on that foundation kept needing me there to hold it up. Here is what God showed me that I could not see before. I used to make decisions from fear. What God showed me was that when He genuinely comes first, the things I was afraid of losing stopped having the authority to drive my choices. Fear did not disappear, but it stopped being the one with its hand on the wheel. I used to have no time for God because everything felt urgent. What God showed me was that putting Him first did not clear my schedule. It cleared my vision. I became able to see the difference between what actually mattered and what was just making noise. That distinction changed everything about how I spent my energy. I used to experience every loss as just loss. What God showed me was that every time He moved something out of my life, He was creating room for what belonged in the season He was taking me toward. The removal and the preparation were the same movement. I just could not see both ends of it at the same time. If you are watching this and God is genuinely not in first place in your life right now, I am not here to make you feel condemned. I know exactly what that position feels like because I lived there for a long time and called it faith. But I want you to hear this from someone who has stood on both sides of that line. Life on the other side is not easier. It is not more comfortable. It does not come with fewer problems or cleaner circumstances. What it has that the other side does not is meaning that holds even in the moments when nothing makes sense. God does not ask for first place because he needs control. He asks for it because he knows that everything else in your life only functions the way it was designed to when it is built on the right foundation. What he showed me was not a formula for a better life. It was evidence that when he comes first, your life begins moving in a direction that you could not manufacture on your own, no matter how hard you tried. If this video touched something in you today, type this in the comments right now. God first from today. Not because you have done it perfectly up until now, but because today is where it starts. Share this with someone you know who has everything at the top of their list except God. You do not need to say anything alongside it. Sometimes a video that arrives at the right moment says what a conversation never quite could. Every video on this channel begins from the same honest place. Not from theory, not from having everything together, but from what God showed me in the seasons when I could not see anything at all. If that is something you want more of, subscribe. The next one might be exactly what you or someone you love needs right now.